In the quiet coastal town of Elk, California, nestled along the rugged Mendocino coastline, lies the Kristofferson Ranch, a sprawling 557-acre property that once belonged to the legendary singer-songwriter and actor Kris Kristofferson. After his passing in September 2024, the ranch was sold to a young couple, Michael and Sarah Thompson. Seeking a serene escape from their bustling city life, the Thompsons were captivated by the property's untouched beauty, with its dense redwood forests, expansive meadows, and nearly a mile of ocean frontage. The original roadhouse and barns, dating back to the 1800s when the ranch operated as a dairy farm, still stood as silent testaments to its rich history. Shortly after moving in, Sarah began to notice subtle anomalies. At first, it was the faint strumming of a guitar echoing through the halls at night, a melody reminiscent of Kristofferson's timeless songs. Michael dismissed it as the wind playing tricks, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One evening, while exploring the old barn, Sarah discovered a dusty reel-to-reel tape recorder. Curious, she played the tape, and the barn filled with a haunting rendition of Me and Bobby McGee. As the song played, she felt a cold breeze brush past her, sending shivers down her spine. Determined to uncover the source of these occurrences, the couple delved into the ranch's history. They learned that Kristofferson had cherished this ranch as a sanctuary, a place where he found inspiration and solace. It was said that he often wandered the property, guitar in hand, composing melodies inspired by the crashing waves and whispering winds. One stormy night, as thunder rumbled and rain battered the windows, Michael awoke to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Grabbing a flashlight, he ventured out to investigate. The beam caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure, a tall man with a weathered face, strumming a guitar. Before Michael could react, the figure vanished, leaving only the soft chords of Sunday Mornin' Comin' Down lingering in the air. Terrified yet intrigued, the Thompsons invited a local historian to the ranch. He revealed that many locals believed Kristofferson's spirit still roamed the property, eternally connected to the land he loved. The historian recounted tales of previous owners experiencing similar phenomena: unexplained music, fleeting apparitions, and the unmistakable scent of cigar smoke wafting through the rooms. As the weeks passed, the occurrences became more frequent and intense. Doors would slam shut on their own, lights flickered incessantly, and the melancholic tunes of Kristofferson's songs played at all hours. Sarah began to feel a profound sadness, as if the weight of the musician's emotions were pressing upon her. One evening, while sitting by the fireplace, Sarah felt an overwhelming urge to write, a passion she had long abandoned. Words flowed effortlessly, and she penned lyrics that seemed to come from another time. Reading them aloud, Michael recognized them as verses from an unreleased Kristofferson song, one that had never been made public. Realizing that the spirit was not malevolent but perhaps seeking to share his unfinished work, the Thompsons decided to honor Kristofferson's legacy. They organized a small gathering of local musicians to perform his songs, hoping to bring peace to the restless soul. On the night of the tribute, as the final chords of For the Good Times echoed into the night, a gentle breeze swept through the ranch, carrying with it the faint scent of cigar smoke. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and a serene calm settled over the property. From that day on, the mysterious occurrences ceased. The Thompsons believed they had granted the legendary musician the peace he sought, allowing his spirit to finally rest in the land he so dearly cherished. As the days passed after the tribute, an eerie stillness settled over the ranch. The thick morning fog rolled in from the Pacific, curling through the towering redwoods and clinging to the weathered beams of the roadhouse. The wind, which had once carried the faint strum of a guitar, now whispered only in the rustling branches. It seemed, for a time, that the spirit of Kris Kristofferson had finally moved on. But Sarah wasn't so sure. At night, when Michael had long since drifted into sleep, she would sit at the old wooden desk in the study, fingers tracing the cracks in the surface. A deep sense of longing weighed heavy in the air, an unspoken presence, neither hostile nor entirely benign. She would listen, waiting, the silence stretching unbearably thin. Then, sometimes just before the weight of exhaustion would pull her to bed, she would hear it, a single note, Soft, barely there. A gentle pluck of a guitar string, as if someone, somewhere, was testing the sound. She never told Michael. Instead, she let the unease settle into her bones, growing accustomed to it the way one does with a persistent chill in the air. The ranch was old. History seeped from its walls, its creaking floors. Perhaps, she reasoned, some echoes of the past were bound to linger. And then the dreams began. Sarah had never been one to remember her dreams in detail, but these were different. Vivid. Unshakable. She found herself standing in the barn. The smell of damp hay and aged wood thick in the air. The walls stretched higher than they should have, the rafters disappearing into an unnatural darkness. A warm, amber light flickered from an unseen source, casting long shadows. And there, in the center of the room, sat a man in a worn leather chair, his face obscured by the brim of a cowboy hat. She knew, without needing to see, who he was. In every dream, he sat in silence, fingers idly tapping against the armrest as if keeping time to an unheard melody. She wanted to speak, but the words never came. She wanted to move, but her feet were rooted to the ground. The only thing she could do was watch, heart pounding, waiting for him to acknowledge her. And then, as if sensing her presence, he would lift his head ever so slightly, just enough for her to glimpse the deep-set eyes beneath the hat's shadow. That was when she would wake, heart racing, breath unsteady, the weight of something unseen pressing against her chest. It wasn't just the dreams. The small disturbances had returned, subtle but unmistakable. A chair slightly pulled out from the dining table when no one had touched it. The scent of tobacco curling through the air in the dead of night. The old record player in the living room clicking on by itself, the needle dragging lazily across the vinyl without playing a song. And then, one evening, something happened that neither she nor Michael could ignore. It was just past midnight when Sarah woke to the sound of hushed voices. Not the wind, not the house settling, but actual voices, low, murmuring, barely perceptible. She turned to Michael, expecting him to be asleep, but his side of the bed was empty. Heart hammering, she pushed back the covers and padded barefoot down the hall, the wooden floor cold beneath her feet. The voices grew clearer as she neared the living room. Michael stood in the center of the room, his back to her, his posture rigid. The record player was spinning, but no music played. The air was thick with the scent of something she couldn't quite place, earthy, like aged wood and dust, and something deeper, something almost metallic. "Michael?" she whispered. He didn't turn. "Michael!" She tried again, stepping closer, reaching for his arm. At her touch, he inhaled sharply and spun to face her. His eyes were wild, pupils blown wide. "Did you see him?" he rasped. A cold dread crawled up her spine. "See who?" Michael swallowed, glancing back at the empty chair by the fireplace. His hands were trembling. He was sitting right there. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I saw him, Sarah. He was looking right at me." And then, as if in response, the record player let out a long, distorted note, the needle dragging across the vinyl in one slow, grating movement before silence swallowed the room once more. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. The air in the room felt heavy, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Sarah stared at Michael, at the way his chest rose and fell too fast, his hands still trembling at his sides. The glow from the dying embers in the fireplace flickered weakly, casting unsteady shadows across his face, and she could see the sweat beating at his temples despite the chill that had crept into the house. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. "Michael, what did you see?" His eyes darted back to the chair by the fireplace, the old, cracked leather chair that had been there when they moved in, too heavy and worn to bother replacing. He took a step back, as if afraid that something might still be sitting there, unseen. "It was him," he said, voice barely more than breath. "Kris. Or something that looked like him. He was just sitting there, staring at me." Sarah felt something cold press against the base of her skull. She turned, slowly, toward the chair, half expecting to see someone there, watching them with dark, knowing eyes. But it was empty. Just an old chair. Just the flickering firelight playing tricks on their minds. "Are you sure?" she asked. Michael let out a short, humorless laugh, running a hand through his hair. "I know what I saw, Sarah." He was sitting right there. And then he stopped, eyes narrowing, as if trying to pull the memory into focus. "And then what?" Michael hesitated. His throat worked as he swallowed again, and when he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more uncertain. He was playing something," he murmured. "Not a guitar. Just tapping. Like this." He lifted his hand and began rapping his knuckles against the side of his thigh in a slow, rhythmic pattern. 3 beats. A pause. 3 more. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She knew that pattern. She had heard it in her dreams. The tapping, the slow, deliberate rhythm, it was the same one the man in the barn had drummed against the armrest of his chair. She had never spoken about it, never told Michael about the dreams, and yet here he was, replicating the same motion, the same cadence, the same silent message. Her stomach twisted. She turned back to the record player, to the warped vinyl still spinning uselessly on the turntable. It had been off when they went to bed. She was sure of it. And yet, a faint scratching sound filled the air. Not from the record player this time. From the hallway. A slow, deliberate scrape, like nails dragging lightly against wood. Sarah turned to Michael, but he had already heard it. His body was tense, shoulders squared, fists clenched at his sides. The noise came again, closer this time. Scrape, scrape, then silence. Neither of them moved. The only sound was the faint crackling of the fire, the occasional pop of burning wood. Sarah's breath was shallow. Every muscle in her body wound tight. The hallway was dark, an empty stretch of shadows leading to the bedrooms, the bathroom, the front door. But something was there. Something was waiting. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, and in the same instant, the record player, silent for minutes, now crackled to life. The speakers hummed with static, and then, through the distortion, a voice, low, hoarse, weathered by years of whiskey and cigarettes, murmured a single line. "Help me." Sarah's blood ran cold. Michael sucked in a sharp breath, stepping forward instinctively, but she grabbed his arm, fingers digging into his skin. "Don't," she whispered, but she wasn't sure why. He didn't move. Neither did she. And then, from the darkness of the hallway, barely above a whisper, the tapping began again. The tapping was slow, deliberate. 3 beats. A pause. 3 more. It echoed through the hallway, impossibly deep, like something knocking against the very bones of the house. Sarah's pulse hammered in her ears, her grip on Michael's arm tightening as the sound continued, steady, unrelenting. The fire behind them dimmed, the embers pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Michael swallowed hard. He turned his head just enough to glance at her, his expression taut with something between fear and defiance. He was waiting for her to say something, to make sense of what was happening. But she had no words. The tapping came again. Closer. Michael moved first. He stepped forward, breaking free of Sarah's grip, his breathing slow and measured. She wanted to stop him, to tell him not to go, but her voice had been stolen by the weight in the air, by the electric charge that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. The hallway stretched before him, impossibly dark, the shadows thick and unmoving. The single bulb overhead flickered weakly, casting brief glimpses of the narrow walls, the wooden floor, the closed doors to the bedrooms. Then the bulb went out. The tapping stopped. Sarah's breath hitched. The silence was thick, absolute. Even the wind outside had died. Michael's voice was tight when he finally spoke. "Who's there?" "Nothing." Sarah's hands curled into fists, nails digging into her palms. She could feel her own heartbeat in her throat, the sheer wrongness of the moment pressing in from all sides. Then, a whisper, low, raspy, a breath more than a voice. "Still here." Michael inhaled sharply, and Sarah felt her stomach drop. It had come from the end of the hallway. A shadow moved, not the slow, shifting darkness of the house settling, not the flicker of an uncertain light. This was something else, something deliberate, A figure stood there now, just beyond the reach of the dying firelight. Tall, motionless, a presence rather than a person. Sarah felt frozen in place, her body caught between fight and flight. Her skin prickled, her breath shallow. The scent of something old, something earthy and deep, filled her nostrils, tobacco smoke and damp wood. The ghost of whiskey lingering in the air. Michael took a step forward. The figure did not move. Sarah wanted to scream at him to stop, to run, to turn on every damn light in the house and burn through the shadows, but her voice was locked in her chest, trapped beneath the unbearable weight of whatever was standing there. Michael reached for the light switch on the wall. The moment his fingers brushed it, the hallway came alive. The walls groaned, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the floor, through their bones. The doors along the hallway rattled violently in their frames. A gust of freezing air slammed through the corridor, carrying with it a sound that wasn't quite a voice, something hollow, something broken. The figure shifted, the cowboy hat, the broad shoulders, the glint of something in its hand. Sarah's breath caught. A guitar. Michael jerked back, his hand flying away from the switch as if it had burned him. His voice was tight, barely controlled. Jesus Christ. Sarah could barely hear him over the way the walls seemed to breathe, over the deep, pulsing hum that filled the air, vibrating like a struck chord. The fire behind them guttered, the embers dimming further. And then, over the growing noise, beneath the frantic beat of Sarah's pulse, the sound of a single string being plucked. Clear, sharp, a note of warning, or a call to listen. Michael exhaled shakily, taking a slow step back. Sarah finally found her voice. It was small, unsteady. What do you want? The fire crackled violently, a brief flare of light illuminating the hallway for the first time in minutes. And then she saw it. Not just the figure. Not just the way the guitar in its hands looked wrong. Its edges blurred, like something half-formed, like something trying to exist. No, she saw the eyes. Not angry, not empty, just tired. Heavy with something unfinished. The tapping started again. 3 beats. A pause. And Sarah knew, without understanding how, that this wasn't over. Not yet. The tapping came again. 3 beats. A pause. 3 more. A rhythm that felt ancient now, older than the house, older than the land itself. It pulsed through the walls, through the floor, through Sarah's very bones, until she was sure it wasn't just a sound anymore. She could feel it inside her. The figure in the hallway didn't move, stood still, waiting. Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. She wasn't even sure how she found the courage to speak, but the words left her mouth before she could stop them. What do you want? For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The air was thick with silence, as if the whole house was holding its breath. Then the figure lifted its hand. Not the one holding the guitar, the other hand. Slowly it moved, fingers curling slightly, gesturing. Come closer. Michael's grip on Sarah's wrist tightened. No, he whispered, voice hoarse, but she barely heard him. Something in her understood now. She didn't know why, didn't know how, but she understood. She stepped forward. Michael cursed under his breath, but didn't try to stop her. The closer she got to the figure, the colder the air became, like stepping deeper and deeper into some forgotten cavern. The scent of old wood and tobacco was thicker now, and something else, something metallic, like rust or dried blood. The figure didn't move as she approached. And then, just a few feet away, she saw the guitar clearly for the first time. The wood was dark, almost black, but not with age. Burned. The edges charred, the strings frayed, the surface split in places, as if it had been through a fire and somehow survived. A horrible thought struck her then. This wasn't just a spirit. It was something left unfinished. She took a shaky breath. You never got to play it, did you? The figure tilted its head, just slightly. The tapping began again, this time softer. 3 beats. A pause. 3 more. And suddenly Sarah knew what it was. A cue. The start of a song that had never been finished. She could feel the melody in her mind now. Something old, something sorrowful. A song that had never been recorded, never been heard. And it wanted to be played. Her throat tightened. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. If she played it, if she finished it, the spirit would finally rest. Her gaze dropped to the guitar. "Sarah," Michael whispered, his voice taut with warning. "Don't." She reached out anyway. The moment her fingers brushed the burnt wood, the house seemed to exhale. A deep, shuddering release. The fire in the living room roared to life, golden light spilling into the hallway, chasing away the heavy darkness. And the figure began to fade. Not all at once. Piece by piece, like smoke unraveling. Sarah barely noticed. She was staring at the guitar, at the way it suddenly felt real in her hands, solid and warm, the strings humming beneath her fingertips as if waiting. And then, she played. She didn't know the chords, didn't know the notes, but her fingers did. They moved without thought, without hesitation. A slow, aching melody filled the house, winding through the air like a breath of wind, like something that had been trapped for too long finally being set free. And in the corner of her vision, the figure gave one last nod. Then it was gone. The house fell silent. Sarah exhaled shakily, her hands trembling as she looked down at the guitar only to find that it wasn't there anymore. Nothing but empty air. Michael let out a long, unsteady breath. "Jesus," he muttered. Sarah turned to him, her heart still hammering. "Did you?" "I saw it." His voice was tight, disbelieving. "I saw everything." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled warmly behind them now, no longer dim and weak. The house no longer felt heavy. No more shadows creeping in the corners, no more tapping. Just quiet. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She didn't know how long they stood there, just listening to the stillness. But eventually, Michael took her hand and squeezed it. "You okay?" She nodded, though she wasn't sure if it was true. That night, for the first time since they had moved in, she didn't dream of the barn. And when she woke in the morning, the house was just a house again. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.